What lessons can we learn from this incredible rescue? First, this is what optimal decision-making looks like. We are only scratching the very surface of how the tools Derek used in the rescue and those found in the alternative response method can benefit you. We're going to briefly introduce you to 4 ARM principles, which I think you'll find Derek used to great effect during the rescue. Number 1, it's all your fault. Derek and the Air Force team had to assess all of the information to begin to take full responsibility for the outcome, even before they had the authority to do so. If each one of us takes full responsibility for every situation, it allows us to strategically respond in the manner of our choosing. Your feelings are not your friends. There really is no place for feelings in trying to save those young lives. Initial estimates indicated that only half the trapped kids would make it out alive. Those fears and anxiety had to be managed and kept in check in order to make optimal decisions. Ego, the thought of being a hero or being prideful often has negative impact when making difficult decisions. Derek and his team needed to manage egos as well as logistics. And there's a great quote in business by Peter Drucker: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." This was certainly true in the rescue, and it is true in your life as well. Each family member, business, team, group, and individual has a different culture. In order to be successful in any endeavor or challenge, you must understand the culture and work within those constraints. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Senior Master Sergeant Derek Anderson. Derek has been in the U.S. Air Force for 19 years, Special Operations Warfare for 17 years, and has obtained the highest advanced U.S. military qualifications. Derek has shown me his resume, which I'm not at liberty to share, but we could spend many hours just going over his extraordinary accomplishments. I've studied decision-making my entire life, and I can say unequivocally that the Thai rescue is one of the most incredible series of decisions I've ever come across. It makes the Apollo 13 rescue seem like a walk in the park. Derek is one of the most humble and competent people I've ever met. And those most intimately familiar with the rescue would agree that he was the single most important decision maker. When Derek is not risking his life to save people, he and his team are keeping our country safe around the globe. And now, with no further ado, welcome my good friend, Senior Master Sergeant Derek Anderson. Derek? Is anybody there? Are we still?
Yeah, I was having some connectivity issues. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
All right. Thank you, Warren, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As you guys and girls will probably see, there's a lot of media surrounding this very high-profile rescue. Right now, there's a massive movie on Amazon called 13 Lives, which is more fictional. It's not necessarily factually accurate. It was more a Hollywood version. Recording in progress. There's also one that I think is probably the most accurate by National Geographic called The Rescue. And that's mostly all of us that were involved in interviews from a first-person perspective on Disney Plus. And Netflix here in about 2 weeks is going to release I think it's like an 8-part series, more from the boys' perspective of what it was like being inside of that dark, cold, wet cave for so long without food and water, and what was going through their head, you know, and how they managed stress and meditation. So I guess I preface all that to say that, you know, as everyone's discussing the rescue, different people had different roles. There was 1,000 people plus involved in this operation, and each person experienced it a little bit differently. My role specifically was the team leader for the U.S. Special Operations contingent that got called in from Japan, where we were stationed. And so I'll kind of get into some of the more nitty gritty details later on of what I was doing there, and more importantly, kind of the value I provided. But without further ado, we will jump right in. So this is the Wild Boar soccer team. It's a group.
Can I remind everybody to can everybody please mute their, please mute?
What do we got here?
Okay.
10 pounds of stuff?
Yep. 10 pounds.
Okay.
A huge box. And then is this hold for the?
Hello. Good. All right, I'm going to continue. Go ahead and hit the slide for me, please, Warren. So a lot of people wondered why they were going into a wet cave. Generally speaking, the boys had done this before. This wasn't like a first adventure for them. They had gone in the past, usually to celebrate one of their birthdays or an event, where they would go deep into the cave and kind of sign this rock as like a rite of passage, and they would initial it. So this wasn't new for them. And generally speaking, in Chiang Rai this time of year, it's still dry. The monsoon rains don't come until later in the year. So ultimately, they ended up getting trapped, but this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. They had just decided to go hike a dangerous or a flooded cave for the thrills. Slide. So geographically, just to walk you in, there's Chiang Rai up in the box. It's right on the border with Burma and Myanmar. It is the cave Tham Luang is the 4th largest in Thailand. They're still exploring it to this day. And like I said, it's generally a dry cave 6 months out of the year. And then once the monsoon rains arrive and a lot of the rain moves south, the cave floods for at least 5 to 6 months, where it's unhikeable. Slide. So here's the entrance to it. You can see it looks like it's a pretty large cave, but it definitely tailors down as you go. And just to give you a little bit of a perspective, that's what it looked like when I walked in on the left, and that's what it looked like when we arrived, or shortly after we arrived, on the right. Slide. So this is how these cave systems work. They're sump caves where it's not just a flat, people would think, was it a dive the entire time? Well, the cave goes up and down. So just like you would have with like the plumbing in your house with a toilet, this sump that was up at the T junction, which you'll see here in a minute, flooded. So they were past that sump, and that's how they ended up getting trapped in there. Was the water came from the right side. They were on the left side of that T junction, and it flooded the sump, which was their exit. Slide. So here we are, quick snapshot. We were alerted at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and they asked us if we could help. Initially, the information was pretty vague. It was about, hey, there's some kids stuck in a cave, and there might be water, and they need, personal recovery or rescue assistance. So we, being a small group in Okinawa, have that as one of our primary skill sets, which is personnel recovery, where we do confined space rescue, we do diving, we do ropes, we do medicine. So it was definitely up our alley. And it was actually a fairly quick alert from the time that we got alerted. I think it was the 23rd of June. We were at the cave site within 17 hours, and that's from Japan to Thailand. Slide. So here we are kind of coming in, myself and Major Charles Hodges. He was my mission commander, really great guy. He was also kind of crucial in letting me and the guys I was with work without being harassed too much. There was obviously, as the rescue went on, there was a lot of questions, and he was kind of the up and out for command and control. So it was really great having him. But this is us coming into the cave and just trying to get a situational report, right? This was kind of the initial initial phases of trying to figure out what was going on. Slide. So there was a lot of chaos in the beginning, as you can imagine. There was different volunteer groups showing up. Rick and John, the British divers, had shown up, and there was just a lot of effort, but there wasn't very much unity. And so that's kind of one of the things that that I guess had to figure out initially, right? Was kind of who was who, where was their value added. And this picture is a perfect example of that. So Rick and John went in after they had arrived, the day we arrived, the next day to try to do an exploratory dive, and they found these 3 individuals. They were like water workers, volunteers, stuck. Nobody knew they were stuck. They were back in chamber 3. And like I had said before, when the cave had flooded, it flooded in sections. So it was dry when these 3 individuals walked in, and they didn't notice. And again, sumps 1 and 2 that were south of their position became flooded, and they got trapped. But because of all the chaos, nobody even knew they were in there. Rick and John had to dive them out. And ultimately, the information that they gained from that short, like 30 to 40 foot dive with these adults greatly informed us of the complexities of this cave, and helped drive our decision making to ultimately, force us into what we ended up having to do, which was like full sedation of the children, which is what ended up having to happen later on. Slide. So this is just a short snippet, but I like it because it kind of just gives you a base to start, right? And in the military, it's all about understanding your operational environment. This was a very complex one, but understanding where I'm at, where I'm trying to go, and visualizing. And you'll see this in Warren's book. He talks about visualization. He talks about decision making, and it being decisional versus non-decisional, and factoring those different variables in, right, as you're framing your problem and you're developing your approach to ultimately get to what you're trying to do. So we have a thing called the military decision-making process, or MDMP. And, it's very structured. It's how we approach a lot of complex problems or campaign planning. I'm not going to go too much into it, but I figured it was worth mentioning because it was the tools that I had used and we all use in special operations when you first arrive at a difficult problem set, right? Slide. So for me, the first thing we had to do was figure out who was there, right? And I call it like level the playing field. Like there was no place for egos. We just, okay, you're a governor, you are a director of this agency, you are a general, I am an enlisted master sergeant, these are civilian British divers. Like you had everybody from every walk of life. So we were kind of figuring out exactly where everybody would fit, and then more importantly, who was value added, or who could we use, and then who was just had good intentions but was just getting in the way. Warren, is there any other lines below that? I think there's one more. So for us, the first things was somebody has to be in charge. Like it's just in an operation like this, there's way too many moving parts, and there's way too many decisions that need to be made, and only one group of people need to make those decisions, and that's the people at the top, which was the Thai government. So just letting everyone know.
Portfolio, that's going to hurt, and all the damage, or hopefully most of the damage.
Recording in progress.
Rates that are in the rear view mirror.
You guys, it looks like somebody unmuted their mic.
Are an attractive place.
Wow, pretty interesting there. What about anything in technology that you would consider
It looks like it's John.
beautiful or boring?
So I'm going to continue. The important thing was establishing, like I said, that clear chain of command, and then knowing that diving was just one option, we had to establish different courses of action, right? So there was so many people there with other skill sets that could be utilized, so not just relying on one. And initially, the diving wasn't even a feasible option because the flows in the cave were way too strong to try to swim against. Slide. So again, every day we would sit down and we would establish, okay, this is how much progress we've made with diving. This is how much progress we've made with pumping. This is how much progress we've made with finding alternate entrances, which we found a handful of other entrances on the side of the mountain. It was just a lot of them didn't lead very deep. So it was a grind every day, and we had kind of reps, you know, you had to have reps from each section, and we were just walking it through with the different countries and just figuring out our progress each day and seeing if an action was still going to be viable or not. Slide. We also were discussing courses of action with gas and oil companies. So outside of the pumping, we were going to try to do some drilling, like, you know, think the mine in Chile. That was a much more structured rescue because they knew exactly where they were and they knew exactly, you know, where the mine was and the shafts and everything, which was, you know, and it wasn't flooded. But we figured they had the personnel on site, the engineers, they had drillers, and we were ultimately figuring out where below the surface we could get to. Ultimately, there was two creek beds that were about 600 plus feet that could be over the cave. Everything else, as you'll see if you look on Google Earth, there's massive mountains over the cave, which would have been well over 1,500 to 2,000 feet, which was just impossible. Plus, there was no roads. Like, you couldn't drive. You know, you have to drive these big rigs with drills, which wasn't possible here. So the environment, again, comes back to knowing your operational environment and understanding what's feasible and what's not. But at this point, we hadn't found them, so we were continuing to work all of our options. Slide. Another one of the options was trying to lower the water columns in the different sumps to make things that would have been a dive walkable. We were able to accomplish this in at least the beginning parts of the cave in chamber 1 and chamber 2. And we ultimately, over the next few days, made those walkable, which really helped because we established a Fortis operating base in chamber 3. And beyond that, there was kind of like a levee or a dam beyond 3, and the pumps weren't super effective beyond that, but they were definitely moving a lot of water from the first 2 and kind of out through the mouth of the cave. And you can see some of the pumps on the left were the smaller ones, and the ones on the lower right were smaller ones that were floating. And then those ones on the upper right were massive, moving, you know, millions of gallons of water a day. It was incredible how much water we were moving out of the cave, and it would be like coming down an inch, 2 inches. You know, it was pretty phenomenal. Slide. Again, like I talked about, this was one of the options. We didn't have roads, so we used the Mi-17 helicopters as we were continuing to work our courses of action to create helicopter landing zones and bring drills in and begin trying to drill in that one creek bed. So we had a team clear kind of a small HLZ or helicopter landing zone, and we were going to bring in this drill and drills like it to begin trying to punch down the 600 feet and at least see if we could get to airspace where we thought the cave could be, since we hadn't found them. We weren't exactly sure where in the cave they were. There was all these unknowns still. But as you know, you guys saw probably in the news, it was getting, you know, more and more doubtful that it was going to be a body recovery. But by this time, it had only been 5 or 6 days. And if you do have access to water, you know, the human body can survive up to 2 weeks without food if you're still able to drink water. So we were still keeping the foot on the throttle on the different courses of action and ensuring that we were doing everything in our power to try to at least add value to the rescue, and ultimately, you know, hoping that the kids were still alive to find them. Slide. This guy here is named Tanet Nasri, and he was a great friend. You know, like I talked about, they came or people were coming up every day offering to help, but he actually lives in Illinois. Him and his wife own a Thai restaurant, so his English was pretty good. And he was like, hey, I'm an engineer and a hydrologist, I think that's the word. And he goes, I can basically help move water or divert water that's going into the cave, because right now the divers are saying it's dangerous because the currents are so strong. And so he just needed manpower, but he used good old fashioned, ingenuity with PVC pipes and sandbags, and was able to help make these makeshift dams and divert water to either nearby valleys or to areas where he could retain it. And that was pretty crucial in slowing down the water to where the divers started to make serious progress. And they came out, Rick and John came out that day and were like, yeah, this is making a big difference. And it was also crucial at the end when it started to rain hard the last day. Those dams were able to slow some of that surge and allow us to get the last 5 individuals out before it fully went back to its original state. Slide. So here you have a video. This is shortly after Rick and John found the boys. So I'll let you guys listen. I don't know if the audio, if you could turn the audio up. There you go. You can see they were very, very thin and emaciated from having been there, almost 10 days with no food, dirty water. This was a video we took afterwards that we had Rick and John take specifically to try to get a good read on their mental health, their status, their physical health. And you can see just the resilient nature of the boys. It was pretty incredible to see them, I mean, you got to think in the mind of a child, they have no clue what's going on. And so when Rick and John did find them, they thought they were just going to hop on their back and swim out, and they had to leave them there with nothing initially when they found them. And it was pretty crazy. That's where you really have to set emotion aside. I was talking with Rick and John when they found them, and they were like, yeah, we had to swim away. I had one Snickers bar in my pocket and I couldn't even give it to them because it was like, how was I going to give them one Snickers bar between all of them? And they thought that they were just going to head out that day, but I think the heavier burden that Rick and John and me discussed was now if we leave them, or if we aren't able to get them out, that the world thinks that this mission's over, that the kids are safe. The kids in their mind thought that that it was over. They found us. But we had, they secretly had told me, I think we opened Pandora's box, and this is where it ultimately got extremely difficult, and decision making and planning and rehearsals, became a big deal. Slide. So here's a good kind of a 3D image, if you will, that Nat Geo took a few years afterwards that shows the cave. You can see the entrance on the right. You can see over there where it says Sam Yek, kind of where it starts to dip south. That's, if you go right and not left, that's where the other part of the cave goes. That's where the water came in from. And then you can see all the way up there past, the low Kralpataya beach is where they found the wild boars dug up on that ledge there. And it was pretty far. It was about 1.5 miles or 2.4 kilometers from the entrance of the cave. And not all of it was underwater, as I'll talk in a little bit. Some of it was underwater, some of it was a drag, some of it was afloat as we were bringing them out. Slide. So like we said, this was kind of the big meeting of the minds after we found them, and we were all going through like different options. And this is where, some of the rescuers that were there were very emotional. They were like, all right, we got to go in and get them now, and just from prior missions and things I've been on, like you can let like your emotions take over for a minute, right? You can experience the relief, the joy, or the, other emotions that come in, but then you immediately have to take a few deep breaths and realize, okay, those are emotions, that's great, but that's not going to help me solve the problem at hand. So we kind of put everything on hold, and we decided that we were going to come back the next day and ultimately begin figuring out how we were going to tackle an unprecedented, impossible problem. Slide. We were going through with our Thai counterparts, the Thai Navy SEALs. They had certain ideas that they thought were going to work. Us and the British Australian contingency kind of had separate ideas that we thought would work. So we were parallel planning, but we also had unity of effort. Slide. Here you can kind of see that this was literally the great technology we had. Rick Stanton hand drew this to the best of his abilities, and it, more importantly, it depicts the areas that were underwater. So, you know, no air, and then the ones that were like floatable. So if you kind of go from right to left, you can see like chamber 4 is dry, and then you go back under, you pop up, there's another little, you know, area near 5 that's dry, and then there's a 350 meter section of water, but that's not a dive, that was just a swim. And then you got to go back under at 6 to 7 was a dive, 7 to 8 was not. That was actually a overland rock outcropping that they had to pull the boys over, which we had to bring a litter, and then another long 350 meter dive to their location. So it was a lot of complex terrain, but this is what we were working off of, and this is what we were briefing off of. We ended up just labeling these chambers just because when you're briefing things, it's easier to have that reference. Slide. Again, great technology. We were on the side of a wet jungle mountain, and we in the military are used to working with limited technology. We also have some of the best technology, but you know, half of the challenges are knowing when to use what. And for this one, this is what we had. So we just use whiteboards and, you know, hand-drawn maps, and then stickies you'll see up here in the next slides. And we're able to go in and really start the detailed planning of, you know, which staging areas would have what rescuers, what tanks would be there, how many, you know, litters we would need, if we needed, you know, a tank swap. And if their area had to be swapped, it would have to be at a dry area. It was just all these different things that we were working through. Some days I remember, I was with Rick and John like 8 to 10 hours at a whiteboard going through all these contingencies, right? Like, what if the water rises? What if a rescuer gets stuck? What if they lose a kid? What if they lose the line? Like, just going through and just rehearsing and wargaming. Slide. So here you can kind of see, you know, a picture's 1,000 words. So we were moving hundreds of tanks forward staged into chamber 3. They were flying them up from all over Thailand. We were bringing in equipment. We were, you know, moving med gear in. You can see the water, like that's literally what it looked like. Imagine holding your breath, you know, and going into a freezing mud puddle that's also underwater, that you know, that's what it was like navigating this operational environment. So it was extremely difficult. A lot of it was all off of feel, right? You just had to close your eyes and feel kind of where you were going. Slide. We knew that as the time progressed, it was ultimately going to be a rescue mission that was going to involve most likely sedation. And I'm not going to get into the details of everything because we just don't have the time today. But ultimately, Rick and John said if they come out, they're going to have to be asleep because it's just way too stressful. The anxiety would be through the roof. We tried to bring adults out and they almost killed us and themselves, right? So you also have the safety of the rescuer in mind. And so this was a tool we had. We had these awesome masks. We were able to figure out at the pool rehearsals that we could set them to positive pressure. But you know, first things first, like everything else we were doing, I wanted to make sure they would fit on a child's head. So this is like I think a 10-year-old boy that we asked a family to borrow that was nearby. And we were just trying on the different equipment that we had and making sure we could get the straps to fit. Even if, these are adult masks, but cinched all the way down, we were able to get a halfway decent seal. And you'll see later at the pool rehearsals, it was pretty effective. Slide. This is us at the pool with John here and some of the Thai SEALs working through rehearsals. A ton of the tanks on the left, you can see forward staging them, jamming them. There was like a 24-hour operation going of filling these air tanks and bringing them back, because it wasn't just the rescue divers. There was also support divers. There was a lot of people involved. And so we had to continue this jamming operation 24 hours a day. Slide. We were figuring out exactly, how to weight them. The equipment, the buoyancy compensators for an unconscious child, because he has to be neutrally buoyant for it to work, right? It's not like you can just let go of him and he's gonna sink. Within the cave, there's pinch points, there's rocks. Like we had to make sure that in a freshwater environment, we could get their bodies, unconscious bodies, to be like these small inert packages that were neutrally buoyant. And so we spent time with dive weights and buoyancy compensators, and ultimately ended up even using a small empty water bottle taped and zip tied between their feet to keep their feet from dragging, because we got the body and legs right, but we couldn't get their feet from dragging the first day, which kudos to the Brits for using everyday objects. And we just figured a small empty water bottle worked perfect, and it did. Slide. Here's a video of us as we almost had everything dialed in of the divers really learning the best technique to swim, which was one hand on the child, one hand on the guide rope, and kind of kicking. And most importantly, obviously you have good visibility here, but figuring out, okay, when I'm in water with zero visibility, how am I going to know if he's alive? And that's where we figured out if they had their chin resting on the kid's head, they would still be able to feel those bubbles, even though it was zero visibility water, and know that they were still alive, which was kind of unique. That, again, figuring out through rehearsals. Slide. So we were all the way up until the last few days going through all this stuff. And this is a very military thing to do. So we ended up having to brief that night to get approval. They flew in the Thai prime minister, or I'm sorry, the minister of the interior. He was a retired or maybe current 4-star general that reports to him, and the prime minister report up to the royal family. So we briefed them on the plan on paper, and we talked about it, and it seemed like it was well received, but there still wasn't a decision made. And we kind of went through everything. So I said, hey, we also like to do things where we're physically kind of rehearsing. It's called a rock drill, or rehearsal of concept in the military. So we ended up setting out chairs, and it looks rudimentary. Some of the Brits also said it looked a little rudimentary, but this is where you fine tune and find cracks in your plan, right? So having people physically walk in with like the amount of air they were supposed to have, which was represented by the bottles, right? Where they were going to drop them. We had certain support divers that had to leave bottles at like chamber 5, and how many bottles the divers had to bring into chamber 9, and how many we had to leave there. There were some SEALs that were back there that needed air too, staying with the kids. So again, this looked rudimentary, but it was so funny because after we rehearsed it 3 times, everybody was like kind of sold, and we cleaned up some mistakes that originally, people thought that they had an idea what they were supposed to do. And then when we walked through it, they realized, oh shoot, I was supposed to leave a bottle here and I'm supposed to have 2 extra on me. Slide. Another unique thing we did was take medical oxygen. One of the plans I think that the Thai SEALs had been instructed to do was to try to, this was before the dive option, was try to run a line all the way back to the kids, because we knew the air was bad. It was about 17% oxygen from our air monitor that we had, and that didn't work out. Obviously, it was not the best plan. So we had all this oxygen, and since, you know, in regular compressed air diving, oxygen toxicity doesn't happen until about 35 feet. And this cave didn't go deep. It was just a sump cave. So knowing that the kids were going to be unconscious, we just said, okay, let's go ahead and jam their bottles with oxygen versus compressed air. And that way, if they do flood or something happens, it'll hopefully buy us 3, 5, 8 minutes where they're hyperoxygenated. Even if they were unconscious, their body would be saturated, right? And that's what the brain really needs, is oxygen. So it was kind of a unique thing we did that worked out, and those were the ones that were labeled with green. So as support divers and regular divers were bringing bottles in, they knew that if it was a green Chemlite or a green tape tank, that it had oxygen, and that had to go to one of the boys, not the divers. Slide. So this was the big secret that eventually got out. It was very hush hush as we were doing it, because as you can tell, nobody in their right mind, any anesthesiologist would say it's okay to clinically sedate someone using a high sedative and then bring them underwater, especially in this environment. But, you know, we were presented with a lot of options, and we went through all the list, and ultimately ketamine is one of the safest medications to use because it doesn't affect nearly as bad your vital signs, your respiratory rate, your heart rate, like morphine or some of these other ones. So we ended up going with ketamine, and there was some other small medicines Dr. Harris used. He was the anesthesiologist, but this was the big one. And the divers carried ketamine in little Ziploc bags, and we were able to figure out you could just inject straight through the kid's wetsuit. So it was very effective. You didn't have to have all this wazoo stuff or an IV. You could just go straight through the muscle into the wetsuit and administer it as a bump dose, which happened several times. Slide. This was that last brief I talked about. This was me briefing the Minister of the Interior up here at the head of the table, and the head Royal General, and all the other leadership from the different organizations around the table. You had the British Council, you had Major Hodges there, and it was a very important brief. But ultimately, I think this, coupled with the rock drill, was what ended up, you know, selling the leadership. This was a very kind of tense brief, because when questions were being asked about success rates, you know, Major Hodges said, I think 50% of them may die. And you have to look at, you know, this country's leadership and their government and say, look, I'm not promising a you know, rainbow's outcome here, but I promise you, if you don't do anything, all of them will die. Both of them are horrible decisions, but after everything we did, I was very confident in our personnel and our plan, you know, but it's difficult, you know, saying you're possibly going to kill children is a very intense thing to brief. And that's where I was being very direct and not emotional. You know, I'm a father myself, and even if it was my kids in there, I would have briefed it the exact same way, right? It just comes down to the raw data and rehearsals, but this had never been done before. Nobody had ever done this, and so it wasn't like we could use some playbook to say, yeah, you know, off of our calculations, this should work. I mean, in theory, yes, it should. And as you guys can see, the rescue was phenomenal, and people, I mean, it was a home run. But this was the data we were presenting at the time. Slide. Here's just kind of a reenactment, but this isn't like a little difficult to see, but this is the divers swimming with a kid under them, and more importantly, to give you an idea of what the dive line looked like. Always in one hand, but you know, this water would have never been anywhere near that clear, but it just gives you a visual image. Slide. After chamber 3, there were some crazy parts of the cave that looked like this. So since the kids were unconscious, we had to figure out a way to safely and quickly move them through treacherous terrain. Nothing worse than, you know, getting a kid out through that crazy front part of the cave and then have them slip or bash their head on a steep cliff or a rock or fall to their death. So it was great. A guy named Josh Morris that had a climbing company in Chiang Mai. His team partnered with us, and we were able to build these high lines and use our Skedco litters and move them really quickly, safely, and effectively. Slide. More pictures. Slide. Slide. This is us doing a periodic medical check, specifically checking their oxygen levels and their heart rates and making sure that they were still with us, that they weren't decompensating. Slide. This was towards the end of the mouth of the cave where a lot of the human chain would form to get them the litters up to the front. Slide. This was some of the core people that I like to talk about because they took tremendous risk and hung it out there, especially Dr. Harris and Dr. Chow to the right. You know, these guys could have been labeled, especially Dr. Harris doing the sedation. He could have been like the guy that was framed for killing kids, you know, possibly lost his medical license. Jason and the British divers up top were awesome. Specifically like Rick and John were the two I worked with the most throughout. And then Eric, Miko, and Klaus were our 3 main support divers, and they were huge in helping forward stage tanks and clear debris. Slide. This is kind of the forward team that worked from chambers 3 to 9 of support divers, PJs, and kind of the docs or the rescue personnel. Slide. So a lot of people ask, you know, how do we get approval from the Thai government with predicted casualties up to 50%? Again, I already kind of hit on this earlier, but all the things that you see there, right? The rehearsals, the rock drills, briefing, contingency plans, and just talking about every possible thing and what we did as a stopgap or a feedback mechanism. And then most importantly, right, like, I know nobody wants to be the one that's blamed for killing kids, but I would not be okay knowing that, you know, we had a shot at this to even get one out alive. I remember speaking and I said, look, we said 50%. I said, if we can give 1 kid back to their parents alive and the other 11 die, and I know this sounds rough, that would be success to me, you know, because I promise you, if we do nothing, everyone will die, to include the 4 Navy SEALs that are back there, because they didn't have air, and they were also with the boys. You know, they had gone back trying to help after we found them and ended up running out of air. Some of them didn't even have masks. We had to resupply them because they were told to do so. You know, they're not cave divers, and so they would have died too. So that to me wasn't even an option. Slide. Again, I just like to talk about, you know, take this lesson or what I'm discussing and apply it to whatever area of your life, you know, that you think is difficult or impossible, right? And start with yourself. You know, knowing yourself, your self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and how you react is important, because that's half of the battle to me in the beginning. Understanding others, right? Super important. Especially when you're interacting with others like we do on an everyday basis, whether that's your neighbor, your coworkers, or even the person at the grocery store, right? For me, a big one was culture, right? High context versus low context cultures. In this rescue, we had 29 countries, probably like all in all, at least 10,000 people, but I say 1,000 on site, a ton of agencies. And it was really important to know how speak and not be offensive, right? The rude American, if you will. Slide. So again, I talked about this briefly in the beginning, but you're not always presented with great options, zero risk options, right? In the military, there's very few things I've ever done that have been zero risk. It's just calculated risk, right? And you reduce that risk by gathering all your facts, understandings, know what your decision variables are, right? You have very non-decisional and decisional variables, and know which ones you can affect, which ones you can't. Do not be prideful or have your ego in the way, right? There was certain divers there that wanted to be first in, they wanted to go get the kids now. They wanted all this stuff, and it was just like they ended up getting removed from the site. We asked them to get removed because even though they were skilled, they didn't understand the bigger picture, and they weren't team players, right? Take into account potential mishaps. But again, war game everything like we did within your sphere of influence. Be humble, but be bold, right? Don't be afraid to make decisions. That to me was one of the biggest things. Was like I was very proud to still stand by. Even if some kids had died, I would have still doubled down on our decision to do what we did. And then again, emotions. We talked about that emotions aren't good for judgment. Slide. Here you go. This is the happy picture. This is all them back in Bangkok a couple weeks later. I think it was two months later. You can see the couple of them are nice and chubby again, healthy, happy. And it was awesome to have this closure with them. Actually spent some time with them in a kind of a celebratory banquet. See the parents again. So this was really nice for all the rescuers. They invited all of us back to have this dinner. Slide. All right. So thank you all for your time. This talk could be 4 hours, right? I was trying to just hit wave tops, but I hope you guys took something out of this. I had been talking with Warren for a while and about putting something on and specifically tying it with his book, The Art of Quality Decision Making, which focuses on making great decisions through the alternate response method. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'll hand it back over to Warren, and thank you.
Hey, Derek, no matter how many times I hear this story and I watched the documentaries and read books on it, it still just sends chills up my back on how extraordinary this really was. And thank you very much. If you want to contact Derek directly, feel free. He's available for talks and other services. We also offer joint Thai ARM workshops, train the trainer multi-day workshops. All of this surrounds how to implement optimal decision-making. We offer implementation workshops, development of systems, personal coaching, and customizable workshops and engagements. And you can contact Derek or myself, and we'd be happy to help you in any way that we can. So I'm going to turn my video back on here and see if we have any questions. I see one here. Derek, somebody wants to know how the kids are doing today. Do you still have any contact with them?
Yeah, so we do not have a ton of repeated contact, but we do have means of reaching out and ultimately seeing how they're doing, and they're living normal lives. It's pretty cool to see that they have not been super affected by this. For some reason, I thought that they may have, some people that go deep with ketamine don't have the best experience, but they literally felt like they took a nap and woke up in the hospital, which was, perfect. So right now they're, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't spoken to them and probably or heard of how they're doing in at least a year or two, but I know that from what I was last tracking, a lot of the kids were living good, healthy lives, and more importantly, were really doubling down on making their lives meaningful, since they were given a second chance at life, which they didn't think they were going to have.
Thank you. That's what I thought was one of the most incredible thing when I read Matt's book about how composed these kids were and how calm and cool and collected. Just again, there's so many nuanced dimensions to this story. It's just incredible. We have another question. How did you know when your plan was ready? People, when they make decisions, we talk about in the book, decisions are binary. There's the action of gathering all the data, but then you have to make that decision. How did you know that you had enough information to pull the trigger and start the rescue?
Yeah, I would say as a team, we collectively had rehearsed everything, and you know, I think towards the end, we were also up against weather. We knew that there was a huge storm that was about to come too. So if the rains picked back up, that the rescue wasn't even going to be feasible if it was at the level that it was when we first arrived. So having done the rehearsals, the walkthroughs, turned every stone over that we thought was an unknown, got us to, I think, the point where we were able to brief. You know, in my mind, even if you gave us another week, I don't think we could have made it any better than what we did. Right? People were getting sick. A lot of my guys had infections too, working 10, 12-hour days in the cave. You know, there was just, despite all the outside factors weighing in on us, I think that we did the best with the time we had. And I felt very comfortable when, you know, my buddy Josh Morris was like, hey, I think that they don't realize you guys are like at the point where you're ready to brief. And he helped set up that meeting with the Minister of the Interior that night. And so I was confident, the team was confident that we had done everything we could. I would say, you know, I didn't have any more doubts that there was more planning or rehearsals needed.
We have another question. Does the decision-making process you use for this rescue and implied in all the rescues, you go to classes, you're going to be teaching now. Could you tell everybody real quick what your new role is?
Yeah, so now I'm actually living in Florida here at Tampa, and this is where headquarters Special Operations Command is for U.S. Special Operations. So there's a big academy here. It's called Joint Special Operations University, and I'm going to be instructing here as one of the instructors at the Joint Special Ops University for the next probably 2 years, teaching a bunch of different topics. You know, some of them are things that relate to this mission. So joint interagency, intercultural, you know, leadership, communication, problem solving, all things like that.
That's extraordinary. Do you find that the skills that you learned in terms of decision making, particularly for this rescue, and I know you've done dozens, hundreds, thousands of other rescues and missions, do those carry over into everyday challenges of your life, into things that you wouldn't think are applicable? Do they carry over from your professional job to your personal job and to your life in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think some things absolutely carry over. Just the way I approach problem solving or decision making. You know, ever since I was a young kid in the military, they've taught us very time-tested, methodical ways to, you know, go through difficult problem solving. And I think, you know, you had asked me a while back if you thought that the book would have helped me prior to Thailand. And I think at that late in my career, I had learned so many different, you know, techniques and had a lot of different, you know, experiences over the years, almost 20 years worth of military experience, most in special operations. And so I had said, you know, at that point, I think that it wouldn't have made as much of a difference. But if I could go back 20 years, and also more in my personal life, I think that there's absolutely applicability to using that framework, not just in your professional decision making analysis, but also for decision making as a parent, as a business leader, as a coach, as a friend. So yeah.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question, I think. Somebody wants to know, looking back on this incredibly complicated series of events and decisions, is there anything that you would have done differently? I'm guessing there's a lot of things you would have done differently, but is there anything you can think of that tops the list in terms of what you would have done differently?
You know, that's a good question. It's, you know, your ego says, well, I don't know if I would have done anything that much differently because we were successful. But I would probably say
That's a great answer. You know, I think if you know, looking back on the decisions you made and that they were in alignment with, you know, a good outcome, you can't argue with success. So I think that's, you know, looking back and finding that all the decisions were in alignment is awesome.
I mean, if I could do one thing, I would probably have emphasized more about the camera stuff. You know, there was a lot of people. It just, now that I'm looking back, it's difficult because we in the military don't like to use cameras and videos, especially when we're on missions. Most of the time we can, and so it was definitely frustrating. If I could go back, that might be one of the big things, is limit the amount of people bringing cameras and videos into the cave, especially if the kids were to begin dying. That was something that I think would have really affected it. And then I would say a second thing would have been try to establish earlier on, you know, the people that were going to be team players and not, because there was drama all the way up until just a few days before the rescue of people wanting to try different things, people doing their own things. We weren't necessarily a team, and I'm not going to air all the dirty laundry, but it was definitely a couple of different courses of action. Some of the ones I didn't know about that I found out after the fact. So if I had a way to clean that up, you know, and get everybody on the same page earlier, that would probably be my answer to the second part of that question.
Well, we are out of time. I'm just going to throw this out there, but we don't have time for you to answer it, Derek, although I want to talk to you about it later. Is complacency. I saw in one of the documentaries or in the book where after you had rescued a few kids, people started getting really excited and enthusiastic, and you were really on board and said to everybody, hey, we gotta tone it down. We're not even a quarter of the way done yet. And that there's a real risk of complacency as a factor in hurting the decision making, and in this case, hurting the likelihood of the kids' safe rescue. But I don't want you to answer because we're out of time, and I want people to contact you directly or us. We could do 4, 5, 6 hours on this easily. There's an enormous amount of information and incredible, you know, thank you, Derek, for your time here, for your participation in the rescue. And I appreciate everybody spending this hour with us, and we hope to hear from you guys. Thank you. Thanks, Derek.